What's up guys, it is Numotus and I'm here to show you how to make this ultra healthy Neuro bass because nobody says sick anymore, it's 2019. Alright, so let me show you what it sounds like. We're going to be making something similar but not the exact same thing. So here's a little preview. So you guys get the gist. Alright, so we're here in the original project and right now the bass is only a sub. I've drawn out the MIDI, but it's just a sub playing. And a good tip is to create the bass that you're making from the sub, because that way your sub is already perfect. You don't have to try to make a sub to fit your bass after you've made it. Right now I'm just using this Moog sub rack, which is made by the legendary Il Gates. Shout out to that guy. He is truly an amazing person and is great at sharing production knowledge and stuff. So check out what he has to offer. And yeah, what I have done here is I duplicated the sub and then turned up the shaper. Shaper's over here in Filter Global. Turned it on hard mode on 86. So that gives it a lot of grittiness. I also got rid of the low pass that was on the original sub and made it a notch filter, and that has some filter movement because of this envelope. So it's turned to -72. So what that means is when the sound is triggered, the filter moves something like that, giving it a little more movement there. But that's pretty much it. There's pitch decay going on as well. It starts at 24 semitones up and then takes about 170 milliseconds to go back to 0. So you can play around with those settings to get a nice punch at the beginning of your bass. See if I turn this macro down, that totally goes away. Alright, so after that, I've made a list here of all the steps I did to make the bass. So we're going to follow the steps. It's not going to be exactly the same as the other one, but it's going to be pretty similar, so you guys can follow along. The first thing I did was to kind of create a band EQ, and I think I just did that here out of this EQ and kind of, this is mapped to a macro here, so I can kind of pull that down to about 600, I think. After that I used Trash 2, so this is where a lot of the heavy distortion is coming in. And if you guys don't have Trash 2, there are plenty of other awesome free distortion plugins. You can use the amp in Abelton. I use that a lot, but get creative. And since Trash is a multi-layer distortion, you're gonna have to use more than one plugin if you don't have Trash and you're trying to get the same type of effect, because I'm gonna be also using the dynamics and the delay here. So let's just go in and pick something cool. I'm not sure exactly which ones I picked, but let's go. So I've just picked this mirror overdrive and bit wrench types of distortion, and then I mess with these settings. All of these are pretty important. The gain probably the least though. So the next thing, once you get it sounding nice and crunchy, is to go into your dynamics, because often in Trash it's not happening here, but often in Trash, and what I had to do with the original sound is to bring up the gate, turn the ratio all the way up, so that if there's any pops and clicks happening after your sound, then they're gonna get cut by this gate. And that's a good trick, because I always used to have to render the track out and then cut the pops and clicks happening after the sound later in the mix process, which was very annoying. So next you can use the delay in Trash 2 to get some really cool effects if you use a very short delay time. I'll usually use maybe analog, lo-fi, digital. So just a little bit thicker, a little bit wider because of that delay there. So next, I'm using band notch parallel. And that might sound complicated, but it's not. It's just a band filter and a notch filter in parallel. So here we have a notch filter, and we're going to map the frequency to macro 1. Then we have a band filter, and this is also layered with an overdrive being used as a band filter, so it's distorting the specific band that I place it at. And we're also going to map these to the frequency so that we have one macro to change everything. It's a good idea to mess with these levels a little bit. Usually I turn the notch down quite a bit. So that sounds sweet. You want to mess with the macro mappings here because these are full range, so we don't want it coming up all the way. This is my band, so I probably don't want it to come up more than 7K, and I'll set this to something similar. And then the notch around the same, but you know, I don't want it to be exactly the same. So just play around with these until they sound good. So that sounds pretty good to me. You can also mess around with the LFO in the auto filter and the envelope as well, but I'm not going to do that right now, but those can add some cool flavor to your bass. Next step is to add OTT parallel, and I was just experimenting and I decided to use OTT in parallel with OTT. And you do that, you can just create a group and then drop this one in here to create a second chain. So that is beefing it up a lot. What I usually do is turn the time up a decent amount on both of these. And messing with this upward and downward can definitely get you some different effects, different types of punch to your sound. So play around with that and the depth as well. And it's a good idea to use these levels as kind of like a 3-band EQ. So kind of just get it to be balanced with the track that you're making it for. Then after that, we have a frequency shifter, and this is what's doing the heavy lifting in terms of the craziness on the sound. What you're going to do is turn it down, the dry wet, to about half, anywhere between like 30 and 70 usually works. I'm going to put it right at 50, and then you turn the fine up slightly. So that is really what's giving the sound its wild flavor. I'm going to map the fine amount to the macro and then set the minimum at 0 and set the max at, say, -7. You can tell when you go negative that it's slightly different It's a slightly different effect than positive, but it's the same type of modulation, that type of wobbling. So we can leave that like that. And this is something you're definitely going to want to automate. I actually don't like how it goes back down to 0. We want to set it to like... Then after the frequency shifter, we've got another OTT. Common technique with the OTT for me is to turn the time most of the way up. This one I think I may have turned the amount down by about half. And I also want to turn my attacks up a little bit to get more of that punch coming through, that transient that the bass has. And what I'm doing here is adjusting the threshold of the mids by dragging up, and the highs, and maybe the lows. Just so the compression isn't quite as harsh, but it is beefing up the sound still. Then we have an exciter, and following that a De-Esser. So an exciter is a pretty simple rack you can make by yourself. And this one I also learned from the legendary Ilgates. So we're going to use this one. And what this is just two chains, dry chain and an excited chain. We're isolating the very, very highs, and we have a dip here around 3.5K because this is a very sensitive frequency to the human ear. Then we have overdrive and heavy compression. The threshold's turned way down, and the attack's around 30. You can even bring this up a bit more, but just play with it to taste. I'm going to turn the saturator on, and then we have a very, very kind of harsh high-end sound. So here's where the chain volume is for the excited. So I just want to dial that in till it sounds nice and bright and nice and spicy. But not too much. After that, I'm using a De-Esser. I'm almost always using the Waves De-Esser in my productions, but on the top there, whoops, I used the mono one. On the top there you can see there's a Abelton De-Esser, and this does kind of the same thing. It's basically compressing the highs in order to, you know, get rid of that harshness without just using an EQ to turn it down in that specific frequency. So here we're doing the same thing. Oh, turn it on. So that gets rid of that kind of like harsh edge that's gonna maybe hurt people's ears that you don't want to. So then following that, I did a resample. You can either do this by using a resample track like one I have here. This is simply an audio track, and you pull it out, you turn on your mixer options here, and then go into this tab. This will probably say EXT in or none, or no input or something, but then just change it to resampling, and then it will record. When you hit record, it'll record whatever you're playing. The other way to do this is to just duplicate and then freeze and flatten, so that's what I'm going to do. So this is what we have. I usually want to turn the track down a little bit because we're going to add some more distortion and stuff that makes it fatter. What I did first after resampling is add a high pass filter. And this is something you're going to want to automate as well. I didn't really do any automation on the frequency shifter, which I should have, but for the sake of this video, it's going to turn out okay. So for this high pass, I want to turn up the resonance to maybe around 50, and then I already have the frequency mapped here, and I have it turning off when it reaches 0. Quickly, the way you do this is right-click on the on-off button and map that to your macro, and then put the minimum at 1 and the max at 0 so that it turns off. when it reaches 0. That's how you do that. We're going to automate this so it gives it a nice kind of like a rubber band movement. You might see what I mean. So it's good to use some like sharp curves here. So you can see how that's giving it a lot of new movement there. Maybe bring these down so they do come down all the way by just selecting everything and then being very careful and dragging it down. There is a pretty muddy low end in here, and since I'm going to layer it again with the sub, which I can do by simply turning that on and then going all the way back here and turning off the bass that I just made and just leaving this one on by turning the speaker on here. Then I can use this EQ and get rid of my low end here. But this high pass filter, it does want to cut the sub as well, so I'm going to put this on the group. So that sounded cool. After that, we're going to add some multiband compression, and this is kind of just to give it a little bit more life. I will almost always use Pro MB, but OTT, Abelton's multiband compressor is a really good multiband compressor. The idea here is to just kind of hug the places where there's a lot of movement and where there seem to be like some really harsh heavy peaks. And pretty much the attack will let in more of a transient for that band, and the more you pull down the range, that'll duck the sound more, and the threshold will also allow it to duck the sound more, so you can get a nice control over your tonal balance with this plugin. That was really quick, but you can kind of tell how it adds a bit of life back into the sound. Although it makes it quieter, so it might be hard to tell. Next, we're going to add reverb automation, and for this I used Pro R, but you can use any reverb. I believe I used a small, maybe medium room setting. Any of these is probably fine. Let's try the Horn Studio. It's pretty good. I think the brightness is too high. And the decay rate should get turned up, because what I'm going to do is automate the mix. So I do want to put this just on my bass line, not the sub part. So what I'm going to do is automate this up when there's silence in the bass so that it fills in the gaps. So you can hear that gives it a lot of life, gives it a lot of dimension, and you know, it allows you to have sound in this space while also not having a new sound that might be distracting or something. It's still the same sound. anyway, you get the gist of that technique. Next we're going to add some glue compression. We're almost done. You can give it more punch by turning up the attack, or kind of tone it down by turning down the attack. I usually put the release at 0.8 and then turn the threshold down until it's moving a decent amount. And just mess with the settings until it sounds the best to you. Next, we're going to EQ out some of the harshness here. So the way you do that is just take a band and make the resonance pretty narrow, and then kind of just sweep this around. You can tell there's a pretty harsh spot there. Then we're going to take another one and find another spot that needs to be cut. So right around there's another harsh bit. And then at the very top we can kind of cut everything above 16K or 13K, just to make it a little less harsh. After that, we are going to add the lovely Sausage Fattener, and this is just going to kind of beef our sound up for the final time. So we got the reverb going on in the wrong spot there. But anyway, yeah, this is the sound. And if I had automated the frequency shifter, it would have been even crazier. So please do that, guys, and have fun. I hope you guys learned something from this tutorial. And if you are part of my Patreon support team, you will be getting samples of this bass, different notes. I'm going to make some cool stuff, so you'll be getting those in the sample pack for February. I really apologize for not making a sample pack for January. I've been super duper busy trying to improve my workflow and improve myself, improve my life. So yeah, there will be a sample pack for February, and lots of more cool stuff to come. Thank you for being a fan. Thank you for watching my videos, and stay tuned for the next one. Peace out. Look at that. Ooh. Look at those notes go.